And hello.
Hi. Hello, my name is Tondeur and I'm a professor at the Vrije Universiteit in Brussels, Belgium. And here you have...
I am Sarah Howard. I'm from the University of Wollongong in Australia.
And believe it or not, the next 15 minutes we're gonna travel. So feel free to join for a tropical journey. Or Sarah, is it a topical journey?
It's both.
Yeah.
It's both.
Okay. Okay.
If you've been
so
in
can
Australia,
we be your guide?
If you've been in
I'm
Australia, it's
Belgium.
completely tropical. We're soaking wet down here. It's been raining for months. So
Okay, tropical journey then. So can we be your guides? And during this journey, we will also try to tackle some of the challenges in our EdTech jungle. So there we go. Yes, you know, because of COVID-19, schools and also institutions in higher education had to make the transition from face-to-face to remote and online teaching. And we call this, Sarah?
The great online transition.
Voila, the GOT. And a key aspect of this transition was that many teachers had almost no time and no experience to make the transition, which resulted, of course, in a lot of confusion and lack of readiness. And for some teachers, actually, it was quite positive experience, while for others, was of course less positive experience. And this diversity and complexity made it very difficult for schools and institutions in higher ed to provide tailored support. And I think this is specifically the case for school teachers adopting online learning approaches because they had less experience in online and blended teaching. So, therefore, the aim of our research, is to explore teachers' experiences and their perceptions of the transition to online teaching. And our research question is more specifically, what are the themes relating to teachers' experiences and perceptions of the GOTS that can be observed in the word embedding clusters? But what is important here? This is an initial analysis exploring the relationships among these themes and how these findings can inform future online and blended learning and teaching. Now the background. We all know that before COVID, online and blended learning have been used in higher ed, but even there, the adoption was quite slow. This changed dramatically during COVID-19. In a very short time, teachers and students all across the world were forced to transition to online and blended learning. But still, at the school level, very little use was observed where face-to-face teaching was still possible. And also the overall adoption rate in schools have been much lower than in higher ed. And this can be, of course, as I said before, related to teachers' experience or lack of experience with online teaching. So clearly, teachers' professional experience can play, and we all know that, an important role during educational innovations and change.
All right. So how did we investigate this? So again, we're interested in looking at how we can unpack some of those experiences. And we do this a lot in research, but we're quite interested in looking further into this and trying to improve how we in fact extract their perceptions and their experiences. So first, to capture what they were about, how ready were they? How ready did they feel about how their school is prepared for this big change, the great online transition? We looked at it from the teacher's position and from the school's position, their perspective of it. We ran a questionnaire in the beginning of March 2020, when everything was just locking down and no one knew what was going on. We ran an online questionnaire, and we had school and higher ed teachers answered it, and we had over about 1,200 respondents at the time. And we asked them about their self-efficacy. We asked them about how confident they were about teaching and how ready they were for it. We asked them their perceptions about their school's readiness. And we also asked them, and the focus of this particular analysis are 4 open-ended questions at the end of the questionnaire that asked them, what were the benefits of online learning, the challenges, how did they generally feel about it? And then we asked them to respond to a cartoon. We, in fact, do have several papers on this, so you can look into those studies a little bit more if you wish. They should be in the references. But here, because of time, we're going to move straight into the specific analysis. I won't spend too much time talking about the study beyond that. In this analysis of those 4 open-ended questions, and we focused on just the school teachers, and we did a combined automated text analysis approach, and Yo mentioned it earlier, and this is using a particular approach called word embeddings, right? And these we then clustered, so we analyzed these using what's called the Spacey library, and using natural language processing models that exist in this library, because our data isn't big enough. And again, in our paper, we unpack this procedure a little bit more. What's important about this is that we are using data science approaches to inductively extract the words as they come together, as they connect together, which gives us themes. How do we find that? So the automated analysis that we did tells us what themes sit close to each other in the text. So then we did thematic analysis to look at the text to understand, what do these words together mean? How do they come together? So we analyzed the 4 open-ended questions to explore how the words come together, what the sentences look like, what the phrases are around it, just like you do in regular thematic content analysis. This is an exploratory approach that we're using, and we're combining machine learning automated procedures with manual analysis procedures that we typically use. So really what we're looking at is we identified 10 clusters of words, and then we analyzed those clusters to understand what the words in those clusters came together to mean. When we look at this visually, we see they sit on a 2-dimensional space because it tells us, and you can see our blue cluster of words, these words were closely positioned to each other in the text. The brown words are closely positioned to each other, the yellow words, the gray words, and this means that they are likely in the same phrases, the same sentences, so we analyze that. So we have 10 embedded clusters. This is particularly looking at about 663 different responses across those 4 questions. So there were, for example, the cluster with the least amount of words in it was yellow, that's cluster 5. And
just let me ask you, Sarah, sorry for interrupting, can you move to the next slide, because I don't see the next slide on the recording.
Oh my gosh, I changed the wrong slides. Here are your clusters. So you see your blue words, it's situated together here, your gray, your brown, and your green, right? So these words are situated together spatially on this plane because they are located near each other in the natural text that the teachers wrote. So yellow right here, that is our smallest cluster, that's only 24 words. Our biggest cluster is in fact gray, and that had 160 words embedded in it. Using the thematic analysis, we then looked at what those words meant collectively. We went to the text and looked at how they, when they're situated together in the text, in the sentences and the phrases, what those things mean. In the next analysis, we're going to look at just at 3 of them to give an example of this. And again, and we go into it a little bit more deeply in the actual paper. So this is cluster 0, which is in fact our blue cluster, right? So for cluster 0, the words that show up in here are teacher, school, teachers, students, student, lessons, prep, things like that, right? So when we took a closer look at these words within the actual text, it leads us to the comments, right? So teachers' comments. So the topics, the general topics and sentiments of that cluster is how students learned online. Typical comments were possibility for each student to be responsible for their own learning, to work at their own pace, differentiation. This comment was from Belgium, and an extra time to explore teaching skills. And then delivering practical subjects online, practical components. It's about learning online. And that's what they were concerned with. So this cluster, the words were situated within comments that related to how do we teach online? How do students experience online? In cluster 1, this is our orange cluster that sits right down here. And this was about the words that were common in here were transition, change, normal, distance, right? So this was about online teaching to support social distancing. So we had a really particular cluster just about that, but was very particular to COVID, which was interesting, and to lockdowns. So comments were very commonly around social distancing, but also that because they weren't in school, that they can follow along at their own speed, identifying how this can be used beyond the COVID, beyond the pandemic, that looking at, it's important because it's fast, time to schedule, that there's distance, that they can have distance like they need now, but also difficulties around it, that not everyone is connected. And so the distance doesn't actually work for everyone. So they weren't all, so there's some combination in here around positive benefits that they see, and also around the possible drawbacks of this. The next one is cluster 2. And for cluster 2, we see the most common word in this was the word lack. So this is this cluster focused more on issues around what's going on, physical and workload. And this was about differences between online and face-to-face teaching. So comments that came up around this particular group of words was about issues around not about interactions that were necessary for practical learning, lack of time to organize, difficulties moving from face-to-face online, and a lack of feedback when that is different from the face-to-face to online spaces. So it was very much focused around comparing those two things together and issues of that. And in the text, it was very much about lacking that particular dimension of the face-to-face. So,
all right, yeah,
there we go. Those were our 3 clusters.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What did you learn from it, Sarah? When we go back to our main aim, the main goal was to explore school teachers' experiences and perceptions about the God. So we wanted to look at the relationship among the teams. And like one of the interesting findings was, for instance, an emerging theme like distance in the GOTS. Yeah, that's perceived as just a benefit and at the same time a challenge, difficulty, depending on the context. And what I think when I look back at the results is that actually we have demonstrated that this mixed automated and manual analysis of teachers' open-ended questionnaire responses can lead to quite interesting insights. But we're not there yet. We want to move on. Maybe Sarah, you can tell us something more about how we move on with it.
So yeah, so so first we were able to identify teachers' experiences. What's nice about the machine learning approach is that we're able to identify it at a level of granularity that we as humans can only do in small data sets. But the automated process is able to do it across much larger. We did this on 600 odd responses, and you remove bias in that. The manual approach allows us to confirm those findings. So the automated approach just tells us these things are associated to these. It doesn't tell you what it is. We manually go in and we analyze what does it actually mean. So it did work quite nicely in that it allows us to break the large data down into smaller units of analysis. And so that was quite useful for us to be able to identify those themes and actually just work with smaller pieces of data to analyze them. And we just had 10 clusters. We could have more or we could have less. So it was nice that we were able to look at experiences, and particularly in the new experiences of teachers transitioning to online. And that's something that we don't really have experience with studying because this is a whole new event. What was nice is that the automated analysis was able to pick up these new experiences, issues around learning from home or remote teaching or working at a distance. And that it had the sensitivity to nicely represent a set of experiences that were happening there. So it worked well for us. And again, the important thing is we can do this on small pieces of data, this is able to run on a much larger scale, which is really good. However, at the same time, one of the things that we haven't done is that we manually did a thematic analysis of how these words relate to each other. There are approaches that can do what's called a contextual sentiment analysis that can give us more guidance into what these words mean as a collective. So there is that possibility as well, which allow us to then have a little bit more background knowledge about, again, some of those clusters have 160 words. How are we with fidelity and understanding what those mean, so we can get a little bit more guidance from the automated system to support our knowledge that we bring in, our level of sensitivity to it. So that's where we need to go with it. We've got some more work to do on understanding the data set in this approach, but that will be where we go next, to be able to automate a little bit more of that, to get just a general basis of what the machine thinks those themes are. And then we can go in and build on top of that, because a machine will say learning or students or distance, and we need to nuance what about that. So it's a really nice start to that kind of work. So, and particularly around as we get to new, because there are particular to us, and we can transfer those experiences to be able to understand how to carry people forward from the God. So that's our practical contribution to practice space for this, rather than the more experiences help us understand and how to move forward, to be able to support teachers to be able to do continue to form that takes. That's what I think. That's where I think we are. What do you think, Yo?
I agree. Still a lot of work to do. Thank you for having us here, and all the best. Bye.
So if you'd like more information, you contact either of us. The paper is up in the site repository, and our references are here. So you can always contact us for the slides if you like. So again, thank you.